In the episode today, I'm joined by Mark Herschberg, who is a variety of different things from a university instructor at MIT, a startup executive. He's also run a number of B2B and B2C organizations from a marketing perspective, as well as being an author. And we're going to hear about that in a little while. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
This is really, really interesting because the comments that I've had over kind of recent months, really from a lot of people that I deal with, a lot of people that I support and mentor and teach as well, have been really quite consistent around this whole topic of content in its widest sense. So when you kind of offered to come on the podcast, I grabbed the opportunity with both hands because I thought, now here's somebody who knows a thing or two about, well, the term that we're going to be looking at in this particular episode, which is the future of content, because I think this is something a lot of people are tussling with. And I put myself in that category as well, because we're entering into a world really where there's no blueprint. There is no kind of playbook to show you how to do content creation, how to do marketing in the future. And so this is something I really want to go deep into in this particular conversation with you, Mark, because you're getting experience here from a whole different sort of range of perspectives, I guess, with the work that you're doing. So, kind of, what is content meaning for you right here, right now?
Sure. Now, I'm primarily a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer, and I look at the technologies and how they impact content. Certainly, we're all familiar with AI. And AI, in fact, is going to create a tsunami of new content. We're going to generate a massive amount of content, some of which will be used for nefarious purposes. And we can talk about AI and content generation, but more interesting is how we consume content. That is changing independent of what AI is doing. And so I'm going to talk first, let's think about content in general, not necessarily marketing content, but we'll get to that. Let's just think about the content we consume. Most of it is entertainment, books, movies, podcasts. Traditionally, this has all been linear. Yes, you can fast forward, you can jump around a little, but mostly you're going to listen to this podcast start to finish. The books you read are generally start to finish. Same thing with the movies. It's been harder to jump around. That started to change about 30 years ago as we got hypertext, and we can now go to something like Wikipedia and we can just jump to the parts we need. We don't have to do it in a linear order. The other change that's happening that goes hand in hand with this is where you read information isn't where you need information. If you think about all the learning that you've done, well, I'm reading a book, or I'm sitting in class, or I'm watching a webinar, but that's not where I'm going to use this information. That's going to be somewhere else in time and space, and there's a disconnect. Now, historically, there was no way around that disconnect. I would read the book in class or take notes at some conference and then hope that some number of weeks or months later, I would remember it or I could access my notes when and where I needed it. But today, we are seeing a change because today we all carry around cell phones in our pockets. The entire internet, all of our notes, all the content is here in our pockets with us the whole time. And it's a question now of how can we make that content more easily accessible? Because while in theory, well, it's all there in my pocket, if I'm someplace, sometime, and I need the information, and it's going to take me 30, 45 seconds to get it, that's too costly. I'm not going to do that. But if there's a way to retrieve it within seconds, all of a sudden it gets more useful, more powerful. And just as an example, to make this a little concrete, if you think back to Google Glass, that failed. Google Glass, of course, were the glasses that you wore that had the heads-up display. That didn't work for various reasons, but the concept was right, because imagine I'm walking down the street, I haven't seen you in years, and there you are. And you pop up, and my glasses see you, and it can suddenly pull up. Are you married? Well, maybe you got divorced, I didn't know it. How old are your kids? Where are you working these days? What was the last time we spoke? Or that was an email 3 years ago. And here's what you've been posting on social media. And here's all the contextual information I need right here and now. I didn't need it around the block. I didn't need it 20 minutes ago. And I won't need it 20 minutes from now or half a mile from now. But in this time and place, it is relevant. And if we can deliver that in an efficient manner, it changes how we engage with content.
This is such a game changer, isn't it? I mean, I know lots of us, many, many years ago watched the Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report, and thought, "Oh, this is very dreamlike, imagine if," and of course, if you're a communicator or a marketer, you're thinking, whoa, now here's an opportunity because I can just saturate with my message anytime, any place, anywhere. Since then, though, I think the way you're describing it, Mark, is that we've become a lot more discerning in the kind of the style of content and how we wish to consume it. And we're not going to suffer fools gladly here, are we? We are not going to just accept being bombarded with information. This comes back to this thing about personalization, doesn't it, really? Because a lot of the time what we want, and less is definitely more, it is that contextualization that you describe. But it's also got to be really personalized, hasn't it? Because what is good for you in information and content could be very different for me. So we've got to be very mindful of that, both as a consumer of the content, but also as a producer of content. Personalization going forward has to be one of the key elements of this, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And I like your example of Minority Report. In theory, we have all that today. We have facial recognition, and we could put up enough cameras and target people. But of course, we were scared of it years ago. And today, consumers are saying, my privacy, I'm finally starting to stand up and say, I don't like what you're doing. And so we can make it personalized, but we have to do it in a way that is both respectful to the consumer, but also in a way that is relevant. Let's talk for a moment. I'm going to sidetrack, but this will circle back. Let's think about social media. Content creators like myself, we're going to switch to thinking about content marketing. When you put out blog posts, podcasts, social media, these come out in a linear fashion as well. So, for example, thought leaders like myself say, well, I'm a leadership expert. So, what am I going to do? I'm going to post on social media every week. And here we are, let's say Thursday, 3 p.m. Well, here's my post about leadership. Here's my leadership advice. So, I put out at 3 p.m., throw it out there. What happens to my audience? Well, half of them, they're not on social media within the window that it gets shown. So, they don't even see it. And then of the ones who do, they say, yeah, that's lovely advice, Mark, but that's not my problem right now. Right now, I'm trying to hire more people, raise money, close sales. Leadership's not my problem. So thanks, but not helpful. It may be helpful to them in 3 months or 6 months, but no one's going back and looking at your old social media posts. No one's going through your old podcast episodes when you have hundreds saying, let me find the one that's relevant. No one's saying, I'm going to save off that email you send me every week because maybe it'll be relevant. It's done linearly and it gets lost because we do this push. We push out our content and just hope it resonates with the small percentage of the audience. If we can flip that and let the content consumer pull what is relevant, say, today I need sales advice. 2 months from now, my team has grown because of all the great sales. Now I need leadership advice to manage them. They can pull what is relevant. And so this is where you get that contextual example. Certainly the time and place can be relevant, but there can be other cues as well. And so the punchline to all this is content creators, whether you're doing general content like podcasts and books, or you're a content marketer putting out content, is you need to move away from this linear model. You need to move away from the chronological model and create instead a model of smaller pieces of content that can be accessed non-linearly in ways that are easy to find the relevancy to the consumer.
Absolutely love that. That's a really, I mean, I've been doing this stuff for a long, long time. I mean, a really long, long time. And that is probably the most eloquent way of describing the difference between marketing and communications going forward and the decades and decades of content creation and noise making that we've had in the past. There's something really pure and really, well, there's something beautiful about the way you've described it, but the essence of what you've described is so pure here that this is about content creators, if I'm right in understanding and translating what you've just said, in terms of them being really patient. And I think there's a real patience going on here, because what we've been doing, and social media is a lovely example there, because what we've been doing is becoming almost beholden to the follows, beholden to the likes, beholden to the comments. And those have been our KPIs. Those have been the things that have really kind of triggered off, are we doing well? Are we not doing well? And it's almost, I mean, I call these vanity metrics, because it almost, it sends you into this false sense of security that actually I'm measuring something that's really important, but actually to my business, to my longer term brand building, to the success of what I'm trying to do, it contributes, but it's not the end game. But there's something really lovely about the way you've described this, because if people can be patient, if the marketer can just ease off and really go for quality rather than just quantity and just scaling the content, just putting loads out there, and just be creating quality content of which they are then very patient about how and when that's consumed. Oh, that just feels, it's got a really good kind of resonance to it. This just feels so good. How, though, are people going to be patient? Because if this feels like it's the right thing to do, there's still going to be, your boss is going to be saying, get the content out there. We've still got sales to bring in. My numbers aren't there this month. Generate some leads for me. There's still a bit of a disconnect here, isn't there, with the way that businesses are kind of rewarding the marketer with the kind of accolades of, yeah, you're doing great marketing, because it's very much driven by the here and now, isn't it?
The problem is the street lamp effect. And for those unfamiliar with this term, it comes from a joke long ago. There's a drunk man searching in a street. He's staggering around, he's looking around. A police officer comes up and says, What are you doing? And says, Oh, I lost my house keys. I can't seem to find them. Police officer says, Okay, well, I'll help you look. And they spend the next 30 minutes looking all over the street trying to find this man's house keys. Police officer says, We've looked everywhere. I'm not seeing it. Are you sure this is where you lost them? And the drunk man says, No, I lost him over in the park. The officer says, Well, if you lost him in the park, why are we out here on the street looking? Drunk man says, Well, there aren't any street lamps in the park. It's too dark to find anything. We look where it's easy to look. We measure what's easy to measure. Followers are very easy to measure. The social media platforms encourage this metric. They said, we think this is important. We're going to make it easy to track it. And we said, well, okay, it's easy. I will use that. But to your point, that's not really what it's about. It's not how many followers you have. It's how many of those followers are going to convert. And of course, trying to track that is a little fuzzier. In fact, in the publishing world, for the last maybe about 10 years or so, they said, oh, if you want to do a book, well, first, are you qualified? Does the book make sense? But then tell us about your platform. How many followers do you have? And what they've learned is that's not really helpful. Turns out a lot of people who are very active on social media are not buying a lot of books. So even though it's an easy metric to get, you're looking under the street lamp, it wasn't relevant. That's not where your keys are. And sometimes we have to put in the extra effort to really get the relevant metric. So you're right that it's a different metric, and it might be harder and it might be longer term. I'll give you a simple example. My blog, I do what all blogs should do. Some do, many don't. The blog, of course, just the nature of the blogging tool, it does come out chronologically. And of course, I do promote on social media because, well, why not? There's no real cost to doing that. But all my blog posts are tagged by topic because, again, the post I put out today may not be relevant to you, but 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you're saying, now I need things on this topic. I need to know networking now. I'm about to go to a conference. I didn't need it when you posted it, but today I do. So they're organized by topic and you can look back. So I'm not looking at, well, how well did my post do within 48 hours? Unfortunately, there is some reason to look at that because we know the algorithms within a few hours, are they kicking in? Are you catching that tailwind? but long term is really where you want to look. And you have to take this long term view with your marketing. Sure, there are short-term things you have to do. You do have to generate leads every month, or your sales team sits around doing nothing. But you also need to take a long-term point of view. And this comes from my experience as a CTO. Yes, we have to change the color of the button and add a new page over here, but we also have to shore up the foundation. We have to think about scaling for the longer term. We have to invest in our platform for long-term growth. Even if you're not seeing the value of the dollar spent today, that's going to pay off 18, 24, 36 months down the road.
So there needs to be a balance here, I guess, then, doesn't there, with the longer term brand building and the way that you're describing it, and I totally get why that is important, because again, due to the customer's journey, we don't quite know the exact moment when they're going to need it, but they'll decide, they'll vote coming in our direction if we've got the right kind of content to support them, alongside the kind of the shorter term, which I'm guessing from your perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong here, would be very much, you would describe this as lead generation. So there's still a part for lead generation to play in terms of direct mail and possibly paid advertising, etc. But then alongside that, and at no lower level of importance, is this longer term brand building. So is there a typical kind of percentage between the two that you've seen from your experience works, or is it different for every style of business and sector?
I suspect it will be different. And of course, we're saying lead gen in the short term. I think of lead gen because I do a lot of B2B marketing of enterprise products, some B2C, there are bigger ones. For more consumer products and more, you think, impulse buying, Hershey is not doing lead generation. Hershey's doing demand generation. How do I make you hungry? Coca-Cola is just making you think of Coke, so you want more. And so that's the shorter term. But as we think about more of the strategic buying, when you do have a buyer's journey, here again, as you've built that set of content, you've just been building it up over time, you've got a lot of evergreen content. And I'll put a little asterisk there, because obviously certain things in my space of technology, what you put out 2 years ago, it might be a little stale, or it might just need to be refreshed with more up-to-date information, but the core is there. So we think about evergreen or greenish content. If you can understand where your buyer is along the journey, now you can start to deliver some of this great evergreen content that you've been creating, and deliver it because at this point of the journey, this piece of content is most relevant. And so you're just building up that large content set. Now, this is something, of course, marketers have been doing for probably the last about 15 years or so, and more advanced, blanking on the term, the tools that track as the customer goes through the process, they are doing that with your email targeting. But we can be more intentional with it, because usually there's just, what I've seen with a lot of companies, the email targeting is there's one buyer's journey for everyone. And it's just, you're at step 3 and here's the email you get at step 3. But if we can get a little more information about what they're thinking, we can provide much more relevant, contextually relevant information to them.
That so supports things that I've been talking about. There's a phrase I've been using quite a lot over the last couple of years, which is professional intimacy. I just feel that that's a really neat way of kind of summarizing what you've just described there. And it's great that you're saying this same thing too, because if we can just be really awake and really listening to all the little nuances of how certain pieces of content, certain styles of messages, timing, the platforms or the channels we're using, just those little subtleties that just give us a clue as to, hey, this little thing worked just slightly, little incrementally different, better than this particular thing over here. And then constantly learn to build that professional intimacy with the relationship, because ultimately it is about sensing how our customers are changing and adapting their behaviors, because at the one time, yes, we're talking content, but also they're behaving differently in terms of the way they serve content to themselves, aren't they? Because before 10 years ago, we'd be sat at a keyboard typing in a search phrase, and we would hope that we get somewhere near an accurate return. Whereas now we're actually talking, and I won't even say the word SIRI, because if I do, it just triggers off all around me this noise of, yeah, I'm here to support you. And it gives me all these search results for whatever I then follow it up with. But if you can imagine the Alexa kind of, see audio assistants, should we call them? You can tell I don't have Alexa in the studio here. But the other one that starts with S, I do, and it always fires up if I mention it, so I won't. But it's a very different style of, using our information, isn't it? As marketers, as businesses, the customer is going to be consuming it in a slightly different way. I mean, from your kind of CTO experience, I mean, what do you feel is, the future of content via the kind of the audio channel, if we were to call it that? How is that evolving?
I think audio has, in fact, a potentially better place than video. If you think about us walking down the street, now I live in New York City, and many of us, myself included, are looking at our cell phones as we're weaving in and out of the crowds and traffic. But audio is much easier because I do need to occasionally pay attention to where I'm walking, but I don't need the audio channel as much. And so when you think about Google Glass, what they were trying to do, I don't know what the equivalent would be, Google hearing aid, Google earpiece, almost seems like a more natural fit that I can have with me. It's what politicians have. When politicians would go to some meeting, they've got the person who whispers in their ear, oh, this is the big donor, or this is someone you have to meet. If you could have that in your ear, think about how much more effective you could be. Think about even just during a sales call or a conversation, if you had in your ear, oh, the person I'm speaking with just mentioned this, here's what you need to know about that. And it's a lot less intrusive when it's audio. But very important, underpinning all of this is that we need the technologies to make this happen. And that's what's been missing historically. Now, go back 100 years, it's because you had books. That was your only channel, and we just didn't want to carry around books. Even today, while I do have the internet in my pocket with the cell phone, it's still, again, very inefficient to retrieve it. So what we need are new tools, apps, software, interactive websites, including interfaces, audio and video, that can make the retrieval faster and more natural. And that's what's going to take all this content we've been generating and make it much more useful. So I want to be fair to the marketers. Yes, you should generate this content. It should be in smaller pieces that are categorized by different, not even the steps of the journey, even just different moments, different aspects. So it can be recombined in different ways, but we do need a delivery mechanism. As you know, I create an app for one small piece of this, but many, many, many more pieces are needed for efficient delivery.
Do you want to explain a little bit about the app? Because I think this is obviously a very good time to kind of cut in as we're talking about, the technology side of things. I want to go deeper onto things like AI and metaverse in a minute, but talk to us about the app and kind of really the backstory, how that sort of came about, and the future for it as you see it.
I created the Brain Bump app, and this is just one example of what we've been talking about. Now, the Brain Bump app, completely free, available on the Android and iPhone stores, came out of the fact that when I wrote my book is called The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. It covers topics like leadership, networking, negotiation, team building, communication, all the stuff that we need to know that no one taught us. My job is not simply to sell books. My job is to help people be more effective in their careers. And here's where we have that disconnect, where you read information isn't where you need information. So you're reading the networking tips sitting at home, but you need them 2 months later. You're reading management tips at home. You need them at some point. You don't exactly know when this technique will apply, but you need it in the office. I wanted to come up with a way to help people retain what they learned. And I recognize that the best way for people to retain information is through spaced repetition. Fancy name for studying something before the test. But as adults, we don't study. You're listening to this podcast. You've heard all this great advice on this episode, on all those prior episodes. But how much are you remembering a few days later? And you're not going back, you're not taking notes, you're not studying them. So that's inefficient. So, how can we make it easier for you to retain and access that information? So, with the Brain Bump app, we take the key ideas from books, blogs, podcasts, classes, talks. So it works for conferences, for example, or internal training. It takes those ideas, it puts them into the app. Think of little tip cards, like flashcards, but it's not Q&A. It's just, this is what I highlighted in the book, or here's that audio clip, or here's that note I took. They're all in the app and they're tagged by topic. This is important because it's non-linear. It's by topic, so it creates relevancy. And so then the app can be used in one of two ways, either in a just-in-time manner. So as you're walking into that conference and you're saying, what were those networking tips that I read 2 months ago? You pull the app out of your pocket, you open it, you hit networking as the topic, and there are those networking tips right there. It takes you less than 5 seconds to pull it up. So as you're walking into the convention center or you're taking the elevator down from your hotel room, you can do that just in time. I've got what I need, when and where I need it. The other mode is this passive learning mode. If you're a manager, you can't say, hey, hold on, Neil, I got to pull up the information. I got to manage you, but I need to look up what I'm doing. You can't do that. So we know the repeated exposure is what's going to help you retain it. So it works like a daily affirmation. And you might say at 9 a.m., I want to get Monday through Friday a management tip. Just as I start my day, I go into the office, I get a little pop up. It's like a daily affirmation, but it has something from the podcast or the book or whatever is relevant to you. You might also set at 6 p.m. a marriage tip, because that's what's relevant then. Your marriage is on the rocks. You don't need the marriage tip at 9 a.m. and you don't want the management tip at 6 p.m. So that temporal relevancy is also important. But by seeing it over and over, you retain it. You get exposed to say, oh, right, yep, okay, I'm seeing this again. I'm going to remember it. And of course, we always have the brand that created it, the blog, the speaker, the author, the podcast. That brand is there and it's hyperlinked back. So when they hear a great tip from a podcast, say, oh, I love that, I want to learn more. They can click through and go to that episode. And here's the key thing, because it's not chronological, that episode might be from 2 weeks ago or 2 years ago, but it doesn't matter because that episode is relevant to me here and now. And so it lets the content consumer access content when and where it's relevant. And the content creator, of course, has that more brand exposure that happens at exactly the relevant time, which makes the brand more valuable. So that's the Brain Bump app. It's free on both of the app stores. And that's just one example. I think it's a very small step. And we're going to see more and more tools are going to allow people to access this content in nonlinear ways to make it more relevant and valuable.
It's just such a smart way of thinking about this as well, isn't it? Because when you listen to, you there, Mark, sort of describing that, it's just so obvious, and yet none of us have spotted it before you've spotted it. I mean, it's just genius in its simplicity, isn't it? Because this non-linear approach, it makes so much sense. I mean, why have people not spotted this, in not just in content, but just in general? We live such a linear system, don't we? A linear lifestyle. Everything is kind of one direction. We start from here, we go to there. It just doesn't give us that flexibility to take that slightly meandering pathway, if you like, through a day or through a moment. It's very limiting. We have limited ourselves, haven't we, because of being busy? I don't know. Why do you think it is that this is so rare?
Well, first, thank you. And I saw the same thing when I recognized how I wanted to deliver the content to people. I said, well, surely someone did this. I'm just going to go find the tool and license it. And I was shocked that didn't exist. So we built Brain Bump. We just got our first patent on it. We have more pending. I think the reason for this is because historically, when you think about the way we were exposed to content as kids, what did we have? TV, before that radio, before that newspapers. These were very linear experiences. You go start to finish, whether it's a radio show or an article, you read start to finish. It comes out in chronological order. When TV came out, the concept of a rerun didn't even exist. fact, think about how much our lives changed when we got DVR or video on demand or streaming services that I can now watch when I want to watch. I'm old enough to remember, oh, I want to race home so I can be there in time for the TV show to start. And we lived our lives around the media distribution. It's only in the last few years that we started to say, I can move the media into the parts of my life when and where it's useful to me. And so I think we all grew up with that first mindset. And it's only recently that we started to say there's a different way to do this. So I'm hoping that's going to spark more innovation in content delivery. Obviously, we now have it in consumer and entertainment, but we can apply these ideas to our commercial content as well.
So when you're a business owner, you're an entrepreneur, you're a marketer, and communication and propositions and messages and content is so key to the success of whatever it is you're building or creating or offering. This kind of non-linear model feels to me, and I'd be very interested in your view on this one, Mark, because it feels to me that this is thought leadership being enabled, because the old model, you had to just bang your head against this kind of wall of resistance, because it was all about, I've got to get my message through, I've got to keep doing it, I've got to just keep plugging away, saying the same thing day in, day out. But now, because it's non-linear, as long as I'm producing quality content on a very, very specific sort of niche product or niche kind of message, I've got an opportunity here to become thought leader. If I really believe in something and I've got something that has a unique sort of proposition to it, this is the core of thought leadership delivered in a non-linear way. Feels like this is a real enabler for those of us who have, desired or wanted this for so many years, but the linear model just never really served us. Obviously, one or two people make it, but the vast majority of us don't, because of the noise. This categorizing and tagging and non-linear philosophy just feels like it's made for thought leadership. Have I got that right?
That's exactly right, because thought leadership, the nature of it is we are producing evergreen content. That wonderful advice on leadership or sales or whatever your topic is, that applies today, it applied 2 years ago, it'll apply 5 years from now. It's evergreen content. And the same could be true for the content we create commercially. Now, that's not to say both the commercial content, the thought leader content, you do want to do some things that might be a little more ephemeral, that might be more timely. We can take our ideas and package them in a way that's relevant to current events, to the current news cycle. In fact, we're taught to do that. How do you tie in? Because unfortunately, our media cycle is really around what's trending. Trending, it used to be trending. It used to be the topic of the week. Now it's a topic of the hour. And so we're told to go into that, but you can take this evergreen content that you're creating. I almost think of having two versions of the content. You have the core content that's evergreen, and then you have the facade you put on for today's topic. And 6 months from now, you'll take that same core evergreen content and put a slightly different facade on it to tie into a different trending topic. But you really do want to think about what's the core evergreen part. Make sure that's available, because remember, that part, you don't know when that's relevant to someone. That's where we get that whole concept that someone just shows up at your doorstep and says, for me right now, independent of what's happening in the world and the trending topics, this is what I need, and I need to be able to find it. But then you'll have those derivatives with the facades that you're just pushing out, and still the traditional push media mechanisms.
So if we've got evergreen and trending content, or you might, if you're listening to this, you might be calling it stock content and flow content. It's all one of the same thing. It's all pretty much that whole thing about permanent content and more flexible, fluid content. Same thing. So if we've got that as a requirement, kind of for the future of our content that we're creating, where does the role of AI, because we're all trying ChatGPT and others are available, but we're all trying and dabbling and playing with this and hoping it's going to be our sort of trusted friends sat there to create the first draft of this, or the glossy version of that. Everything from a little small micro tweet all the way through to big kind of ebook and everything in between. It seems to be able to create. Where does this kind of sit in your view, Mark, in terms of this kind of tagged, categorized, non-linear approach? Because it feels to me there's a little bit of a disconnect in the way that people are perceiving AI right now, because they're kind of trying to use it to fuel the old model. Do you think there's hope, or are there apps out there, or kind of how would we sort of almost bring the potential opportunity of AI into this non-linear content? Because I'm totally buying into this new form of content, but I want to see AI kind of joining me on the journey.
I would first note AI is going to accelerate this journey, because what's happening now is that we can generate content at an unprecedented rate. If you thought social media was noisy before, think about what's about to happen. I don't use AI for anything other than generating the images that go on my blog post or on my trying to remember, PowerPoint presentations. I'll help it with the layout with some images. I do use AI in my work as a CTO in some of the things I do there. But in terms of my own content as a thought leader, I write my own blogs, I do my own social media. I just use it to generate images because I'm terrible at drawing myself. I respect copyright, so I'm not going to take copyrighted material. And I've been using public domain images, which they're not great. So this has been a game changer that I can get the image I want quickly and easily. But for many people, they're going to be putting out white papers. They're going to be putting out website content, long form content, short form content, social media posts. You can churn it out day after day. You can generate a month's worth of social media posts in a couple minutes. So now all of us are going to turn the dial up to 11, and it's going to get noisier. There's going to be more clutter. And all of a sudden, that fire hose that we've been looking at, that linear chronological delivery, that fire hose is going to become untenable. And this is going to accelerate the switch from, I can't just sit there and see what you send to me because it's just too much and it's so irrelevant to me. I need to do that pull model where I'm saying what is relevant. So I think that will accelerate it. Now, where it can play in here is, first, it can help us generate content. While I don't use it for my writing, people do. And I will say I have friends who are writers who say, I don't want to write for me, but I want help. So they might think about, here's the topic I want to write about. And they'll ask AI, just like they'd use a search engine, what are the things I should be thinking about? You can certainly in a search engine say, well, if I'm writing, here's the 10 things you need to know when buying a firewall. That's a very esoteric example. I used to do lead generation for a lot of enterprise tools. Okay, I can see all these different articles, and across them, I'll come up with 20 ideas and say, well, here's the 10 I want. So I went to third parties to just help me think about anything I might miss. We can use AI the same way and say, what are the 10 things I should keep in mind? So people use it that way. But I think more interesting, we talked about this concept of that core evergreen and then the facade. If you create that evergreen content, if you do the first pass and say, I am just writing this in general, this is my evergreen universal content, I can then feed that into an AI tool and say, how do I tie this into the Christmas season? How do I tie it into supply chain issues that everyone's talking about? So you can help put the facade on using AI. I suspect it will probably be very effective there.
So it becomes, and again, this is a very consistent message I'm hearing from others on the podcast, colleagues, fellow educators. I think we're all of a consistent view, and again, very interesting to hear your take on it, Mark, because I think that is the honest and probably more authentic kind of way of using AI within marketing, particularly. Because the last thing you want to be thought of is somebody who's, it's not actually being created at all by a human. It was all automated, because again, comes away from that whole professional intimacy thing that we were talking about earlier. So I think there's a balance to strike here, and I just love the idea there of using it as a kind of a trusted ally in lots of ways, that it gives you that start, it gives you the kickstart for that article or that presentation, but then it's over to you, so that you can then put in your human knowledge or your kind of experience, because it's not going to know what you've experienced over many decades of professional work. So I think that's a nice balance. It's really important, isn't it? So
I'll give you
did
an
you go on? Sorry, Karen.
example from technology. In software, we're using AI. GitHub, which is a big tool many of us use, they have something called Copilot. And as I code, the AI is looking over my shoulder, giving me advice. Think of it as spell check, but for coders. And why this is valuable and how it plays in, and certainly isn't unethical. AI cannot create the big picture concepts that I'm doing in my code. It can't right now think through, how do we take this data and transform it to deliver value to the customer? What it can help very much with is, as I'm coding and I start to use some library that I haven't looked at in 2 years, and I don't remember exactly, when you do coding libraries, you have to use the exact right, what's the name of that function I have to call? And where do I put the semicolon here? I haven't done this in a while. And that's where it's going to come in and say, I can help you with that because I know all of these little details. And when I think about the nature of my work, remembering where to put the semicolon, remembering what's the exact name of that function, that's not adding a lot of value. I'm happy to see AI take that off my plate, and I can focus on the higher value delivery. Now, I bring this up because this is very important. I do talks for companies on AI. And here's the big thing: we need to look at all of our jobs and break down the individual tasks. Literally, how many seconds or minutes do I spend doing things? Yes, you're coming up with a creative strategy. Yes, you're generating text and copy for your ad campaign. You're also trying to coordinate scheduling meetings. You're also reviewing someone else's work. Think of all those little details. And in a day, you are doing 20, 30 different things. Break it down to really those small little steps and then ask yourself, what can AI do? How well can it do it? And how much value does this create? Because all of our jobs, when people talk to me about how AI is going to change how we work, what we want to do is look for those little tasks, like scheduling a meeting, saying, well, if my AI can talk to your AI, and all those emails back and forth as we coordinate, well, if you can get rid of those, that's saving me a lot of time. That's not delivering value to the customer. So I don't mind that I'm not the person doing it. And that frees me up for the higher value tasks that I can come up with the strategy, whether for coding or marketing. So break down what you're doing into little tasks and understand which of those tasks can AI remove. Now, if it can remove a high value task, well, it will. That means you need to find replacement high value tasks where you can still deliver value to your company and your customer.
It's a great tip, great advice, and I think that comes sort of very welcome to everybody, no matter what level you're operating at. So if you're a senior C-suite executive, right the way through to somebody who's literally just starting out, this applies to you, whoever you are and whatever you're listening from. This applies to you, and this is something which I think is going to be profoundly useful if we can get the right balance. So yeah, that's beautifully described there, Mark. Thank you for that. Do you feel confident in the future of marketing, communications, content, and the technologies that we've described? Do you think the future looks bright, or are there going to be some really dark clouds that are going to take some shifting before we kind of get to that brighter side?
Long term, I'm an optimist, but I think there will be some dark clouds along the way. And I think what's likely to happen now, I'm doing this from the other side. As a CTO, you can imagine I get targeted all the time by sales teams and marketing teams because they say, oh, executive, you've got bam, you've got the budget, the authority. I'm going to speculate you have the need, and I just don't know the timing. So I get hit up multiple times a day by spam. I'm not talking about Nigerian princes. I'm talking about legitimate companies who just say, I'm going to pound this guy, hoping I can catch him at the right moment. And because our content generation becomes much cheaper, we're getting much more of that. I can already spot some of these are AI generated emails, some are not. And so that's just going to overwhelm us. Already, if you think about here in the US, I don't answer my phone anymore because how many times do I get that number? Now, much of it are scams, but and that's because in the US we ban telemarketing. So it's only the illegal people still doing it. But I just can't answer my phone for these numbers I don't know because 9 out of 10 times it's a waste of my time. That's going to happen to us with email, that we're just going to get more and more legit spam. Again, not Nigerian princes where we've got the spam filters are doing okay with that, but legitimate companies not sending in bulk. They're sending that targeted individual email to you, but it's not relevant to me. You just scraped my profile with AI and sent me off a targeted email without you personally doing anything. So that's going to generate a lot of, I think, negative experiences. We're also going to have privacy issues because it will be grabbing more information that it's out there, but not in ways I want it used. Just as an analogy, my face has always been out there. When I walked around 40 years ago, my face was out there for everyone to see, but we never thought, well, someone's going to scan my face and maybe use my face and other things. That's a recent technological advance. And we're going to see similar ideas happening with all that information I've had out there. It's going to start to be used against me. This is where I'm putting on my cybersecurity hat. That's a lot of what I do with my CTO work. And so I think we've got some dark clouds for a few years, but I do believe overall, I believe in humanity. I believe in proper governance, that we will get through it, that we will put controls on there, and it will be better on the other side.
Well, it's nice to end on a very positive note, and I think, yeah, I would certainly share your sentiment there that it's going to be bumpy ride in some areas, and I think we do because there's no playbook, as I said right at the outset. We are making this up as we go, but I think with good intention, really great sort of authentic. Sort of attitudes towards this, and I think yeah, there is hope, for sure. And I want to sort of point people in your direction, Mark, because I think a lot of people will have listened to this and will have thought, Mark speaks an awful lot of sense here. I'm really getting it and understanding it, and I'm not just interested in the content. I want to find out more. So I'm going to point people through the description to this particular episode. I'll pop the link into to Brain Pump app. But is there anywhere else that you'd like people to connect with you?
I'm going to give you 3 URLs depending on your interest. If you're interested in the book and developing your professional skills, your leadership, networking, negotiation, and other skills, the careertoolkitbook.com is the website for that. And you can read more about what's in the book, see where to buy it. My primary blog is on there. And I do write about AI and its impact on the workforce in that blog. So that's all at thecareertoolkitbook.com. If you're interested in the Brain Bump app, well, it's free from stores. You can also go to brainbumpapp.com. So if you go to brainbumpapp.com, you can follow links to the stores. There's an FAQ on there. There's instructions. There's a video that shows how it works. It takes 90 seconds. You can learn more about the app. If you want to read more about how media and content is changing, I have that on my Cognosco Media website, which was never supposed to be a public site, so I'm going to have to spell that for you. Cognosco Media, COGNOSCO Media, cognoscomedia.com. And I have a blog there that talks about some of the topics we covered here and how media is evolving. I continue to put out content there less frequently than my other site, but I do put out new content there.
Mark, thank you so much for your time and eloquence and wisdom today. I will guarantee people are now rethinking their whole content strategies after listening to this. This has been really fascinating and just so clearly described as to what people need to do. It's tagging, it's thinking in the longer term, it's categorizing your thought leadership style content. People, you have to go away and rethink this, because if Mark hasn't convinced you, then there's no hope for you at all. So really go away and just rethink your content strategies based on this. It's non-linear, the future, without any doubt. You've completely convinced me, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on the show.